I've been told I have too many ideas, that I need to sort of stick to my role or my silo or my area. And anybody who knows me will know I'm just not that sort of person. I kind of operate at one speed and one speed only. So it's, for me, the key people have been about the people who embrace me as I am, rather than trying to shape or constrain me in some way. You have to push yourself to do things that you wouldn't necessarily do. You have to sort of lean into pain a little bit, not awful pain, but you have to push boundaries.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. This is our love series, and we are focusing not only on careers, but also on loves that are nurtured alongside them. Let's hear now about exercise, and in particular, Hyrox, the premium functional fitness competition designed for everybody, not just elite athletes. I'm joined today by Charlotte O'Leary, who's Chief Executive Officer and Director of Pensions for Purpose, which exists as a bridge between asset managers, pension funds, and their professional advisors to encourage the flow of capital towards impact investment. She's had a long career in investment management with a particular focus on pensions, as well as ESG and impact investing. She's also a passionate participant in fitness competitions, and in particular, Hyrox. Welcome, Charlotte. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Ethan. It's fantastic and lovely to have this unique opportunity to talk about the overlap between my professional life and my personal life.
Well, I look forward to that. Well, let's start by talking just about your career journey to just paint the picture there. Can you start with where you grew up and what you studied?
Definitely. So, I probably would say this. It's a little bit unique in that I never thought I would go into finance at all. I went to university. I started actually studying archaeology and social anthropology at UCL. And probably because of the sort of person I am, got very frustrated with only having a few lectures. I'm very, very driven. And I decided that I wanted to work while doing my degree so that I didn't actually leave with any student debt. So I migrated my year at UCL to the Open University and carried on doing a psychology degree there with a focus on human biology and biological psychology. While I was working at Jupiter as an analyst, and I was doing my investment management certificate. So I recognized very early on the importance of saving and not having debt. So I didn't want student debt. So that was really important for that. And so I dropped into finance, working in asset management, a bit by accident, actually. But it was fascinating because I thought to myself, I want to get into psychology because I want to impact individual lives. I want to see the difference that you can make by being a support to those people. And I recognized through asset management, when you look at the flow of capital, the significant impact you can have far beyond that one-to-one impact. And of course, now we hear from Make My Money Matter that your pension fund is 21 times more effective from a sustainability perspective than things that you may do in your own home. So that's definitely been borne out. And so I realized that there was a way of bringing those two interests, those two passions I had, of having a social impact along together with the investing background that I had.
Well, let's fast forward now to Pensions for Purpose, because we also spoke with Karen Shackleton, who founded that a number of years ago on a podcast, and I can link to that here. But I'd love to know, because you're now a Chief Executive Officer there, talk about where you sit today, what's on at the forefront of your mind today there, and how you see your work evolving.
Yeah, well, of course, you'd expect me to say this, but it's a fantastic role, a fantastic opportunity, and a brilliant business. The great thing about working with Karen is she's a fantastic mentor. She's had a long background in the industry, really understands all the different stakeholders, has some brilliant relationships, but is really passionate about change and about impact investing, about having a positive social and environmental impact when we invest. And when she set up the platform in 2017, I don't think she had any idea how it could grow. But at that time, it was about bringing together local government pension schemes, a small group of schemes, to understand the difference between responsible, sustainable, and impact investing. And it really has grown significantly since. And for me, it's interesting because when I approached Karen in 2020. So this was in the middle of lockdown. I'd left my role, and Karen didn't actually have a role at Pensions for Purpose, but I believed in what the company was doing so strongly, and I didn't want to go back into having a traditional role. I felt that something needed to come from an independent, that I basically said that I was willing to work for free and prove that we could build up the business. And fortunately, that ended up playing out very well. So I started off as a consultant, and then in February 2021, we became a limited entity, and that's when I took on the role as CEO. And we are a pending B Corp. We're going for full B Corp status, which means that we embed profit, people, and planet in the way that we work and operate our company. So we've built everything around impact, not just our services and the advice that we provide, but also in the way that we operate ourselves as a business. And for me, that ties in all of the things that I cared about when I was looking at psychology and wanting to change the way that people live their lives.
And what I love about Pensions for Purpose and why I toot its horn any opportunity I get is because of the way you force, say, an investment committee to focus and to simplify and to, I think, relate some of, say, the sustainable development goals to their own lives, their own values. Maybe your psychology background lends itself to that. But that I find is simply the only way to make this viable going forward, is to divide it into chunks that can be tackled. How do you see the work you're doing maybe evolving if you were to look forward, say, 3 to 5 years? Will this be the dominant approach that pensions take to invest?
I think, especially with what we've seen from ESG, environmental, social, and governance, we absolutely anticipate that being embedded. Now, I think a lot of people are concerned about greenwashing. We talk about it as impact washing, all sorts of other things. But the way that I think about this, and I think is useful to articulate, because it really is an alphabet soup out there when we think about anything to do with sustainability, is we're talking about companies and investing in companies. And so I like to think about ESG as the risk and return opportunity that the world poses to the company, and impact as the risk and return opportunity that the company poses to the world. And you can see in that, I mean, that's double materiality. So that you can see in that how you need to understand both of those things, the risk and return opportunity in both directions, to really understand everything in relation to that company when you're making decisions about how to invest. And you can't really understand one without the other. So they make sense of each other. And so I would expect impact, therefore, to be embedded in the way that we run organizations and in the way that we provide services and products going forward. And certainly that's how we see our business evolving in terms of how we support that agenda. So currently we're very much focused on education and training, bridging that gap of knowledge that exists, to then thinking about how you can embed this in your philosophy, not just in your products, but all the way through the organization and through to the products and services that you offer.
And you do post frequently on LinkedIn about tying your work back to your values and your mission. And one of that particularly triggered my interest was your loves of fitness, because it's not often that we see people talk about this, and certainly not competing at the level you do. Can you talk us through that journey?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, when you have inflection points in your life. So, and I'm being very open here, but that change, that move to Pensions for Purpose was part of an overarching shift, I think, that happened for me, because I actually separated from my husband and I took a full view, a sort of systems view of my life in terms of how I was embedding my values and whether I was being authentic to what I really believed and what I really valued. And that led me towards Pensions for Purpose, but it also led me on this journey around Hyrox. I'd always been interested in fitness. I've done running, done half marathons. I used to do martial arts when I was younger, but I'd never competed. And it's interesting, if you have self-doubt and you don't have necessarily the support system of people backing you, you don't necessarily feel that you can push outside of your comfort zone. And these things directly relate. Impact investing is very much about thinking in a 3-dimensional way. It's thinking outside of what feels like our comfort zone. And Hyrox is exactly the same. You have to push yourself to do things that you wouldn't necessarily do. You have to sort of lean into pain a little bit, not awful pain, but you have to push boundaries. So for me, the two things really relate strongly together in that it's all about the effort you put in. We can all create barriers. We can all say things are too hard, it's too difficult, the cost is too much, or we can't find the time. But actually, if we really commit and we're disciplined, the outcomes are incredible. And for Hyrox, what's interesting is that I've done 6 competitions now. And when I started, I was finishing in about an hour and 31 minutes, which isn't, it's not too bad. It's a little better than average. And by the time I'd finished my last competition in Frankfurt at the end of last year, I was at 1 hour 21. So I'd shaved off 10 minutes of my time. And a lot of that was not just physical fitness and working on strength, flexibility, endurance. It was also about mindset, that ability to push through that comfort zone, and also then encouraging others. I did a Hyrox competition as a team as well. And it's fantastic being able to support and push others to be the best that they can be. And I think they really, really relate to each other, the role that I got at Pence Purpose and that I take a lot of what I learn in Hyrox and I build it into the business. And that's why I started to bring my personal posts and my professional posts on LinkedIn together.
I love that. And I totally relate to the you reap what you sow type philosophy in terms of digging deeper and getting the reward. And I think in particular for the younger generation, it's important to say that because sometimes that reward may not be instant. You may have to sow a lot before you do any reaping, but I still think it always reflects effort put in. And I'd love to know what the response to those competitions are, because my first reaction is awe. I look on at some of the heavy bag you're carrying or the sled you're pushing or something and saying, my goodness, that looks like beyond something that's humanly possible. But what kind of response has been vulnerable and open about this side of your life has it garnered on LinkedIn?
It's just really interesting because it's also doing it as a woman. You're sweaty, you can't be worried about what you look like, but also it's not about trying to be a certain size or a certain weight or look a certain way. Those things in terms of being fit and being healthy come as a result of the training. So the goal is the thing that's motivating you. And I often think this is why dieting and other things can be very, very tricky because it's not sustainable. And a lot of people, I'm sure, would look at Hyrox and think it's not sustainable. But this is about creating a lifestyle around it. Really is the mentality of it. It's being part of a group where you're all invested in the same goals. And ultimately, it's about thinking yourself holistically. So how are you pushing yourself? How are you setting yourself new goals? How are you motivating yourself? And what is that adding? And I'm very aware that as you get older, your muscle mass decreases as well. So a lot of the things that we tend to struggle with as we get older are to do with back pain, arthritis, and having more sedentary lifestyle. So for me, getting out and doing fitness like this is really important. It also means you do a range of different exercises. So you do 8 1-kilometer runs and then a range of different functional exercises. Now that's good because it's not putting too much pressure on any one part of your body. And then you also make sure afterwards you're getting recovery time. So I've found it really easy to sustain compared to other sorts of exercise that can put a lot of pressure. So for instance, endurance running can put a lot of pressure onto your knees, your shins, your back, whereas this creates a good level of flexibility.
And it's just so utterly motivating as well, I think, for other people to look on. So really, really interesting.
And also, one of the things I'd say is I came to this in my mid to late 30s. So I think sometimes we have this perception, I hear it all the time, well, I'm too old to start this, or the expectation is you do these sorts of things in your 20s. I'm probably fitter than I was in my early 20s. So I think that's the other thing we need to cast to one side is this idea that you can't get to a certain level past a certain age.
Oh, it's just so empowering. And especially osteoporosis, the effect of building bone density on averting osteoporosis, especially for women as we get older, is so important and perhaps also overlooked. So again, another way to avert that. I thought it was interesting what you mentioned also as being a woman doing these competitions, because that gets to a question I ask everyone. no matter what their gender, on this podcast series, which is around diversity. And I'd love to just ask you, given diversity, of course, is part of the whole ESG direction that we're moving in for investing, what is your experience been of diversity across the course of your career?
It's really interesting. I'm not naturally built as the sort of person who's ever thought of my gender as being a barrier to anything. And I really believe it shouldn't be. The reason why I say shouldn't is because there are definitely points in your career, particularly where it's more challenging for women. And I'm focusing on women because that's where we sort of started the conversation, obviously. I think ultimately, the most important thing in diversity is cognitive diversity. And of course, that includes a whole range of different things, including gender. And the reason why I say cognitive is because as part of studying psychology, you'll actually understand the differences in our brain structures between men and women particularly, but there are also nuances between different types of backgrounds as well. But it interests me because, for instance, one of the things that I learned through my studies was that women actually have greater white matter in their prefrontal and frontal cortex. So this is where you have executive function, critical reasoning, and also the ability to mitigate anger, fear, those sorts of emotions. Now, about 90%, more than 90% of the brain, our brain structures are actually the same between men and women. So there are these subtle differences. But the reason why I bring that up is it's not just about quotas or about proportional representation. This is actually about something structurally different in the way that we make decisions. So when we're talking about cognitive diversity, we're actually saying we need that representation to make sure that we've got people who are able to think laterally about solutions. That's incredibly important when we think about some of the big goals that we have, whether it's net zero or trying to create social equity or trying to address issues of diversity. So if we don't have that cognitive diversity at the table, it's very difficult to see how you'd come up with a good range of different solutions.
Such an interesting perspective. I think we've also talked about that a little bit on LinkedIn. So thanks for bringing that up here. Just want to get back to some other personal reflections besides the fitness side. Were there any key people throughout the course of your career who were pivotal at turning points or in setting the direction you're on now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I've definitely had people in my life who have inspired me. I would say one of those is actually Karen through Pen to Purpose. I'm just amazed by what she's managed to create, especially considering the period of time she's been in asset management and the change that she's seen. So I think that's really inspiring when you see somebody doing something that you want to achieve yourself and kind of plows a furrow for you. I would say Karen is definitely one of those people. But definitely throughout my working career, I've had people who are incredibly supportive and friends as well, who absolutely backed me all the way. Even if they didn't necessarily agree with my views, they were very supportive and non-judgmental. I think that's really, really important because the times where I have felt, where I've sort of sat back and thought, oh, am I getting this wrong? Am I in the right career? Is because the number of times I've been told, and it's interesting, it's not about gender. I would say it's to do with the way you think. I've been told I have too many ideas, that I need to sort of stick to my role or my silo or my area. And anybody who knows me will know I'm just not that sort of person. I kind of operate at one speed and one speed only. So it's, for me, the key people have been about the people who embrace me as I am, rather than trying to shape or constrain me in some way.
I very much relate to that. So thank you for sharing that. And of course, Karen is a force for all of us in the industry. And I'll definitely put a link to her own podcast in the show notes. Are there any words of wisdom or any creed or motto that you live by?
Oh, do you know what? I think I do actually. So I say, so those who say it can't be done shouldn't stop the rest of us who are doing it. And I definitely think that's one to live by. Never, ever be limited by other people's fears or limitations. So yeah, I would definitely put that out to anybody because I think it's very easy for all of us to feel held back or that we shouldn't do certain things. And actually, you've just got to be true to yourself.
Well, that is an excellent piece of advice. And I have to say, Charlotte, I know I said that Karen was a force in the industry, but you too are a force. And the passion with which you convey so many diverse points of view, as well as the energy you bring to the work you do, and the fact that you've opened my eyes to a whole new way of physical challenge. And I've been Googling Hyrox and seeing if that's where I'll turn to next after I've done with my current marathon kick. It's been a pleasure to sit here and discuss some of this shared passion with you.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's just great to be able to talk about these sorts of things in a wide-ranging way in an open forum. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Ethan.
I'm Ethan Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.